On January 12, 1888, an unexpected cold front hit the then U.S. Montana Territory and continued throughout the Great Plains. At the time, the region was experiencing a warm spell, and many were excited about the warmer temperature. What was unclear was that there was a blizzard headed straight for these settlers. In the late 1800s, weather stations were still in their infancy, and they were far less common in the sparsely populated western United States. This meant that most people were unaware of the dangers and didn't become aware of the storm until it was right on their doorstep. But people could hear it even from far away. Austin Rolak, a settler from Valley Springs, South Dakota, described the phenomenon, writing, "About 3:30, we heard a hideous roar. A hurricane-like wind blew so that the snow drifted high in the air, and it became terribly cold. Within a few minutes, it was as dark as a cellar, and one could not see one's hand in front of one's face." When the storm cleared out and the numbers had been tallied, 235 people had died. 213 of those were children, many having been caught in the storm on their way home from school. These are just a few of the stories of what is now known as the Schoolhouse Blizzard. Of the 213 children that perished from the storm, almost half of them came from Nebraska. Here are just a few short stories of what occurred. O.W. Myers was 15 years old when the blizzard hit his town. He, along with his two younger brothers, had to traverse the storm on their way home from school. He was later interviewed by the Federal Writers Project during the 1930s. The following is his story. The awful blizzard of January 12, 1888, cannot be forgotten by anyone who experienced it as I did. The weather had been mild after a heavy fall of snow. Deep snow lay over all the ground in fields and on the roads. Long, hanging icicles dripped melting snow water from the eaves of the house and barn. The sky was dark and heavy. Beautiful, big white flakes were falling fast that morning of the fateful day. Father and Mother said, "The girls must stay at home, but the boys may go to school." At 8:30, Walter, then 8, Henry, who was 12, and I, 15 years of age, started out through the deep white snow. Pretty, starry flakes made us look like snowmen before we reached the school, 1.5 miles from home. When we got there, we found other boys, and some girls, playing fox and geese. Henry and I joined in the game. The bell rang, calling us in to study and recite. The heavy snow kept falling all that day. By the middle of the afternoon, at the last recess, the snow was about 2 feet deep, and on the top it was almost as light as feathers. At 2:45, the school bell rang for the last time that day. We rushed for the brooms to sweep the wet snow from our boots. Just when we got settled down, as swiftly as lightning, the storm struck the north side of the house. The whole building shivered and quaked. With the deafening crack, the shutters were slammed shut by the terrific wind. In an instant, the room became black as night. Then, for a moment, there came a ray of light. I stood and said, "May my brothers and I go home?" The teacher said, The boys who live south may put on their coats and go, but the rest of you must stay here in this house. The two Strelo boys, Robert and George, with John Conrad, my two brothers, and I, put out into the storm for our homes. We had not gone far when we found ourselves in a heavy drift of snow. We took hold of each other's hands, pulled ourselves out, got onto the road, and the cold north wind blew us down the road a half-mile south, where the Strelo boys and John Conrad had to go west a mile or more. When they reached a bridge in a ravine, they sheltered a while under the bridge, a wooden culvert, but Robert, the eldest, insisted that they push on through the blinding storm for their homes. In the darkness they stumbled in, and by degrees their parents thawed them out, bathed their frozen hands, noses, ears, and cheeks, while the boys cried in pain. My brothers and I could not walk through the deep snow in the road, so we headed down the rows of cornstalks to keep from losing ourselves till we reached our pasture fence. Walter was too short to wade the deep snow in the field, so Henry and I dragged him over the top. For nearly a mile, we followed the fence till we reached the corral and pens. In the howling storm, we could hear the pigs squeal as they were freezing in the mud and snow. Sister Ida had opened the gate and let the cows in from the field to the sheds, just as the cold wind struck and froze her skirts stiff around her, like hoops. The barn and stables were drifted over when we reached there. The roaring wind and stifling snow blinded us that we had to feel through the yard to the door of our house. The lamp was lighted. Mother was walking the floor, wringing her hands and calling for her boys. Pa was shaking the ice and snow from his coat and boots. He had gone out to meet us but was forced back by the storm. We stayed in the house all that night. It was so cold that many people froze to death in the snow, and the loss in livestock was big. The next morning, we walked out upon the hard, deep drifts and shoveled a way through to the barn, where we found our cows and horses alive on top of the snow that had drifted into their stalls. But a lot of our hogs were frozen stiff in mud, ice, and snow. The road that we came over on our way home from school was strewn with frozen quails and rabbits, dead. Many teachers and school children lost their lives in that blinding storm while trying to find their way home. The blizzard of 1888 has not been forgotten. Lois May Royce had 3 young children in her schoolhouse at the time and decided that the school would not be a suitable place to wait out the storm. She had a boarding house nearby, only 200 yards away, and made the decision to brave the storm. If this had been a normal day, the walk would likely only take a couple minutes. But the storm had created such an intense whiteout that buildings were not visible unless you were only a few feet away from it. Because of this, the party became lost in the storm. The next day, after the storm had died down, Lois was able to see her home. But by then, the situation had ultimately become a fatal one, as by this time the 3 children were all dead. Later, doctors found that Lois Royce's feet were completely frozen, having suffered severe frostbite, and they were later amputated. One of the most tragic stories that occurred during the blizzard was that of Ida and Matilda Westfallen. At the time, Ida was 13 and Matilda was 8. They were on their routinely mile-long walk from school when the blizzard suddenly hit. This caused them to lose their path, and they became lost. The next day, men from the town went searching for the two young girls. The search continued for days, and they were not found until Monday, January 16th. They had been discovered about 2 miles away from their home. The scene was a tragic one, as Edith's coat and clothes had been put on her younger sister, Matilda, likely as an effort to save her. After their story had been picked up by a local newspaper, donations came pouring in, and a monument was built on their graves. They rest in the St. John's Ridgely Cemetery in Scribner, Nebraska. Of all the stories from the Schoolhouse Blizzard, none of them have stood the test of time quite like Minnie Freeman has. Minnie was a 19-year-old teacher to 13 children and was just wrapping up school when the blizzard hit. She noticed the storm during recess and led the children inside. Her schoolhouse was made of sod, so it would have been unlikely to weather such a storm. She fortunately did have some supplies to be able to heat the schoolhouse throughout the blizzard. In an interview after the event, Minnie described how the situation became worse than she expected. First, the door blew in, and then the windows. The roof was also being torn off. Realizing that the sod school could not handle the storm, she grabbed a ball of twine, which she had taken from a child earlier in the day, and began tying everyone together. Their destination was Minnie's boarding house, about a half a mile away. The journey was treacherous, as the wind was rushing towards them, and they were blown down by the storm many times. However, in the end, they were all able to arrive there, and the children were all safe. Minnie's story caught on with the local news, and a song about the tale was written, titled 13 Were Saved, or Nebraska's Fearless Maid. For years, Minnie's story has been shared, although there may be a few discrepancies on what really happened. Emma Lee was one of the 13 children that day and disputed some of Minnie's claims. She describes how they were not tied together at all. She also mentioned that there was a much closer home that they could have traveled to, but instead they went to the further destination of Minnie Freeman's boarding house. Even though we may not know what truly happened, the story of how Minnie Freeman was able to lead her students to safety in the blizzard remains true. The deadliness of the Schoolhouse Blizzard can be partially attributed to the warm spell that occurred right before the storm hit. Settled in Beaver Creek, Eric Olson was a young Swedish farmer who, seeing the warmer weather, went on a morning walk. This caused him to be unexpectedly trapped in the storm's wrath, and he was unable to find his way home. A few days later, 2 feet were spotted sticking out of the snow. Rescuers dug the person out, discovering the body of Eric Olson. Although it took a long time for Eric to be discovered, it took some even longer. Herman Brusk was on a walk when the blizzard hit, and his body took a week to be discovered. A more severe example was that of O.A. Hunt, who was not discovered till April 1st, almost 3 months after the blizzard occurred. The Schoolhouse Blizzard is the 3rd deadliest blizzard in U.S. history, with over 235 confirmed deaths. And due to inaccurate data collection and records, the actual death toll could be much higher, some estimates having the toll as high as 1,000. There may be many more stories that have been simply lost to time. If If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. And if you happen to know a disturbing moment in history that you'd like to be covered, please share in the comment section below.